Um, but yeah, so my topic today is talking about using social media as a research tool, which I realize is a very Gen Z topic, but you know, I am Gen Z, so valuable nonetheless.
We can see.
I also can't see the chat, so if someone could vocally say yes, that'd be great.
Yes, we can. Yeah.
Okay,
I
great.
see people are reacting with the emojis, but yeah, I'll make sure to let you know.
Great. Okay, cool. So, yeah. So, in 2020, there was a huge rise in hate crimes, from 2019, uh, especially in hate crimes targeting Asian Americans. While the reasons behind this increase is still being researched, many researchers so far have attributed this increase in hate crimes to uh, the COVID-19 pandemic and its origins in China being weaponized against Asian Americans. So when talking about hate crimes in the United States, um, this rise in hate crimes was motivated by the increase in hate speech, due to the COVID-19 pandemic. And this hate speech was facilitated or pushed largely through social media and news. So the dangers of frequent exposure to hate speech is that the more you're exposed to hate speech, the more desensitized you become to it. So you're less able to identify it as hate speech. And so it leaves members of the group that the hate speech is directed to more vulnerable to attacks and threats, which is very dangerous because the majority of motivations behind hate crimes is prejudice. By their very nature, hate crimes are crimes born of extreme prejudice. So in 2020 alone, over 8,000 hate crimes were reported with over 11,000 victims. And of those hate crimes, over 60% were related to the victim's race. And this can have devastating effects on the victims. Victims of hate crimes are more likely to experience symptoms like depression, anxiety, PTSD, stress, compared to victims of non-bias motivated crimes. And then the community as a whole that was affected can also experience effects. There's been research indicating that the community feels a decreased sense of security and protection because of these hate crimes targeting their communities. Current research related to racism is largely qualitative, as most research about discrimination, racism, and prejudice is, based largely around self-reported measures, which is very useful, but it's less applicable to a wider audience, and it's less scalable because researchers are often limited by time and money, and they're not able to cover a wide variety or as wide a variety as something quantitative. It's also very susceptible to biases, both from the participants and from the researchers. To combat this, we can start supplementing this research with quantitative measures, particularly from data sources like social media. So social media has its advantages. As you can see, the top social media apps have users that range in the billions. It reaches a wider audience that most surveys or researchers could ever hope to reach or could ever reasonably reach in a reasonable amount of time. Particularly with Twitter, Twitter has over 300 million active users every month. And with 90% of those users making their profile public, you can have access to a wider range of content from users around the world. Especially since Twitter is mostly centered around words, as compared to apps like YouTube or TikTok that are more centered around photos or videos, it's much easier to track trends in national conversations. And with the 280 character max per tweet, it is much easier to analyze those texts as compared to apps like Reddit or Tumblr that is more centered around longer versions of text. So current research that uses social media as a data source has been able to use social media as a way to track neighborhood and national conversations about a variety of topics, such as social media indicators of food environment and state health outcomes, when they found that people who lived in areas that had more fast food or more access to fast food were also areas that had higher rates of diabetes or obesity. In the Time for Dabs study, they found that in areas where laws around marijuana were more liberal, tweets about marijuana will also seem to be more positive. And then when specifically talking about, discrimination or prejudice, with the study with the association between state level racial attitudes assessed from Twitter data and adverse birth outcomes, researchers there studied the association between the sentiment expressed towards minorities on Twitter and minority women's birthing outcomes, finding that states that had less positive tweets about minorities also saw higher rates of negative birth outcomes, like low birth rate or preterm birth rates. And then adding on to this, earlier researchers have studied the association between sentiment expressed about minorities on Twitter and the association between hate crimes and residents' racial prejudice in the United States, finding a high link between, sentiment expressed about minorities on Twitter and racial prejudice in those areas, which makes sense. In social media, there's a certain level of anonymity. You don't have to share your name or your address or your photo. There's been multiple celebrities on social media that have blown up without anyone even knowing what they look like. So because of this, people may feel more willing to share their ideologies that they wouldn't technically be comfortable sharing in different environments where people can identify them. So that's when social media comes to play. And specifically my research, I used a Twitter stream listener to collect tweets from Twitter users over a period of 3 months. That collected all ongoing tweets from users geolocated in the United States that contained one or more racial slurs. From there, I used sentiment analysis to measure how positive or negative a tweet was on a scale from -1 being the most negative and 1 being the most positive. As far as hate crime statistics, the FBI does report a annual report of hate crime statistics from across the United States, though this is limited as this information is based off of entirely voluntary information from the police departments. Police departments are not mandated to share this information with the FBI nor anyone else. So this does limit the reliability of the information because certain states will say have 0 reported hate crime statistics, though that is very unlikely. And then for statistical analysis, when comparing the number of hate crimes to the number of tweets that contain racial slurs, we used negative binomial regression just because the data was very over dispersed, with some states, particularly in the Midwest, having something like 10 or 15 tweets compared to states like New York or Texas that had thousands of tweets. And also statistical analysis was done with R. So as far as the descriptive characteristics of the variables, so the average sentiment polarity score of the tweets was about the average, medium, and variance centered around neutral. So that would suggest that most people using these tweets expressed it with a neutral tone, which isn't necessarily surprising. Most of the tweets did contain an overwhelming amount of tweets, actually over 90% of the tweets were those that contained the N-word, which has a history of being reclaimed by African Americans and being used in a more positive light by those that it was initially targeted from. As far as the actual usage of the tweets, there was an average of 849 tweets per state, a median of 302, and the variance was very large. As far as geographical distribution, there was more variability in the sentiment polarity of the tweets. We see some darker areas and areas we wouldn't necessarily expect, like Montana, Idaho, West Virginia. But it's also pretty dominant in states like Nevada or Utah. As far as geographical distribution, Texas, California kind of far outpaced everyone else, making the other states look kind of pale in comparison. But we also have Florida, Alabama, and New York showing out strong usage of racial slurs. So over a period of 3 months, over 40,000 tweets were collected from over 12,000 unique users. So a similar study done through self-reported measures would have taken, thousands of dollars and hundreds of researchers several months to collect this much information from this many users, while this was done, entirely for free by, someone who just had basic information, a basic conception of like computer science and programming, and I'll admit YouTube. So, As far as the reports, while there wasn't a strong correlation between sentiment and hate crimes, there was a strong relationship between the number of tweets containing racial slurs and the number of hate crimes in a state. So as with the states in quantile 1 of the number of hate crimes, states in the second, third, and fourth quartile were 4, 6, and 11 times more likely to see hate crimes as compared to states in the first quartile. What was very interesting was that factors that may have affected this rate, like non-white population density, and Southern State Indicator, seem to have no effect on the overall model, and the model stayed exactly the same when or without considering these variables. So, as previously mentioned, the N-word was contained in over 90% of the tweets, which will have to be taken into account for future researchers who want to try to use social media as a database. So, like I previously mentioned, there is a certain level of anonymity on social media. You don't have to share your name, your face, your actual location, or anything like that. So that could make some people more willing to share their opinions and their views on social media as compared to like in-person conversations or any other format where they would be less anonymous and more judged for their opinions. There were certain limitations to this study, like only being able to take place over a 3-month period versus, say, a longer period of time, a year or several years. There was also certain limitations that I had personally because Twitter does give special access to like established professors or something like that. There were only certain things I could do with the Twitter API that, future researchers who have certain accreditations may be able to have more access to a larger amount of tweets or more information about the tweets. As far as future research, social media can be used to, track national conversations, as we saw before, in terms of like liberalness of laws or health outcomes. But also now there's at least an indication that we can at least try to quantify things like racism or prejudice or discrimination in a way that's able to reach a much wider part of the population than most studies can reasonably or financially, take part of. So, yeah.
Thank you so much. I learned so many things. Also, it was really interesting that you used Twitter's API because now they're trying to change things and access.
Yeah, Elon Musk and everything. I was actually really wanted to like redo the study now with like Elon Musk changing everything and making the rules around racial hate speech laxer. It definitely does allow more interesting things to appear on the app unrestricted. So yeah.
Wow. Interesting. Congratulations on your project too. We have a question from Lynette in the chat. It says, is the distribution, I believe this is from your visual map, your maps, is the distribution due to the amount of people that are there? Those are larger states, so I would assume that it would make more sense that more people would be using slurs.
Yeah, I assumed that at first too when looking at the data, but then even when I was controlling for things like population density or non-white population, just the general, if there's more minorities around in a certain area, then there's just more likelihood of there being hate crimes. But even when controlling for those factors, the model still stayed the same with states like, Texas or even Alabama, which doesn't necessarily have the highest population, still showing out in terms of racial slur usage. So yeah. Also in the locality of users, how is this data impacted by the use of VPNs? Should give manipulative information on where people are actually located. As far as VPNs, well, the way I geolocated users was actually from, the tag on tweets. So I don't know if VPN affects this, but, if you ever go on a tweet and it's like, this is something that the user themselves put in as they're like filling out the tweet content and stuff like this. Now there is an element of like a person being able to lie about their location, tweeting from their home while saying they're in London or something like that. But I mean, there's that same potential problem in like surveys where participants lie, feel embarrassed, or they don't want to be ashamed or something like that. So yeah, that's just something that happens on social media. People lie.
Yeah.
Or answer.
Doing detail hard. Thank you so much. Does anyone have other questions? This was amazing.
Yeah. And then, social medias can very much show up as, echo chambers. With algorithms, they really like to show you, what it is that you like to push. So if someone with very extreme racist or, prejudice ideals was to go on a social media app and was to, get an algorithm that just pushed them to more extreme and prejudiced views, that's how we get, shooters who post manifestos on Reddit before actually committing the act or something like that. So, hopefully this future research can be done to like better social media's hate speech tracking and like reporting and things like that. Oh, but thank you guys. Yay. Mom raised the hand.
Go ahead.
Hi, I'm Mary. I just wanted to ask a question. So you have some demographic data for the States, but are you overlaying the demographics of the Twitter users as well, like on the input part, on the stream part of the information?
Oh, yeah. So when it comes to Twitter users, that was a certain limitation as, Twitter users tend to skew younger, like social medias in general tend to skew younger, which could affect the results in a way. And also there's like a very large subcultures in Twitter. There's Black Twitter or Stan Twitter or things like that, which could also affect, how people talk and what they say in certain environments. So, that was definitely, a limitation of this study. Right now, Twitter does not collect demographic data, though they, along with several other social medias, are trying to change that. And they're trying to drop this kind of race blind policy that they've been having so that it's much easier to actually track, if certain creators are being pushed down because of their race or being benefited because of their race. So that's definitely something we look forward to in the future. But as of right now, it's kind of hard to tell the demographics of a certain user because it's not a part of like their profile when they set it up. Yeah.
Okay, I understand. So, because I think one of the issues that was there originally is that a lot of Black creatives online have been talking about some of the harms of social media.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't know if they've been believed because maybe there's been this policy that's been there that has been negatively detrimental to Black creators online. Do you think like your research, I know you're interested more in like the association with in real life harm, but are you also interested in like online harm and harassment and the things that are going on with Black creators like brigading and stalking? There's all kinds of stuff happening to Black people and Black creators online.
Yeah. So, when it comes to like racism online, it is harder to track because, like previously mentioned, a lot of social media sites initially adopted a race blind policy where they assumed if they didn't collect race data, then race could play no part in their algorithms or stuff like that, which we know not to be true. Black creators tend to have fewer views or are more likely to be harassed on certain sites than non-Black creators. So in the future, after Black Lives Matter and social media sites had to actually pretend to care about racism, they did start to adopt policies that would, incorporate things like race and gender into their demographic data. While that still is being pushed out, Facebook, the parent company, just initially rolled out a plan to like collect race data and age and those sort of things from its users. But as far as like, say, if you wanted to look at an app like TikTok or YouTube, where it's more focused on video or photos or something, that would probably require like more advanced machine learning to be able to identify the difference between a white creator or a Black creator and their sort of views. But I'm definitely interested in doing that research in the future, Yeah. long as they're short.
That is so awesome. I'm so happy that you want to continue to build on this type of research and really make impacts, you know. Thank you.
Of course, thank you.
I have another question, but
Okay.
okay, so I'm a complete newbie to all of this. And I just wanted to know, did you have fun doing this work? Like, was it really interesting for you?
Yeah, yeah. So, I've been coding for a while, and when you're a CS major, the most prominent jobs are like software engineer. You go to a thing and you do software engineering, which never seemed that very not interesting to me, to be honest. I was never really interested in just, working for some big company and doing software engineering. But as I was doing this project and applying, the skills I had learned in CS to this project specifically, it kind of really made me re-fall in love with CS in the first place. And it kind of showed me that there was, different paths to like using my quantitative skills and my CS skills and not necessarily having to go into software engineering, but I can apply it in research and even, discrimination research that directly benefits people that look like me and my community. So yeah, this project, there was photos. My sister took a photo of me when I was like reading over a book to help me. She was like, "Oh, you look like a total nerd," which I mean, I guess I did, but yeah. Thank you guys for coming. This is very nerve-wracking, but you guys are so nice. Thank you.